Hello friends, today we'll be talking about Death Rider by Zamil Akhtar. So before we get started, I always think it's important to mention that I'm really weird about spoilers. I like to go into books not knowing anything, so I will have a section at the beginning of this video for people who like to go into books not knowing anything, and then I'll give a little bit more, nothing major, but just about as much as you'll get from the synopsis, maybe just a tad more, but I'll be sure to add chapter notes to the bottom, so you can be sure to avoid that if you like to go into books not knowing anything. So Death Rider is a prequel novella to the series Gunmetal Gods. And I read Gunmetal Gods and Conqueror's Blood before I read this, but I think if you're curious about it, if you want to give it a try, I don't think it's necessarily required that you read Gunmetal Gods before Death Rider. There are some things you'll recognize and some names you'll recognize, and you'll have a few, oh, that's this person, or it'll give you some context to the story, but I don't think it's necessary. I think it will help if you read Gunmetal Gods first to give you some context, but I don't think it's required. So if you want to take a chance on it, you can. I don't think it'll diminish your experience with the book too much. And Death Rider is free when you sign up for Zamil's newsletter on his website. I'll leave that link down below. So if you want to give it a shot, it is free to read, so you can go check that out and give it a read that way. With a novella, it's tough to develop too many things. It's tough to develop characters and world building. It's tough to do so much in a short period of time. This book is about 100 pages long. You can finish it in one sitting if you wanted to. There's so much story in this book. There's so much that happens and so many thoughts you have after. But basically, it's about a woman who is in almost like a suicide mission, about a war that's raging, and you start to question which side is right, which side is wrong. Everyone believes they're right, and who suffers because of all these different decisions that are made. So it does question you do start to question war and combat and people who suffer who are just wrapped up in this big mess, who have no control over what's happening. Also, there's some pretty heavy horror elements to this one that I did not expect. There are horror elements to Gunmetal Gods. This one has a lot. It cranks up the horror, and I loved it. And it's very, very thought-provoking. So that's the go into the book not knowing anything section. We're going to go into a little bit heavier, what you'd pick up on the synopsis. So just a heads up for those of you who come by for the not totally non-spoiler reviews. So our main character in this book is a woman who has been tasked to be a Death Rider. Basically, a Death Rider is she's being punished for something, and she has to ride into battle with very little weapons or armor. She's just cannon fodder. Basically, she's just there to do as much damage as she possibly can as a punishment. So she goes into this with very little hope of surviving, and you really feel that in this very, very short book. The impact of this is felt. I'm not sure how Zamil does this, but you feel those feelings of despair and hopelessness in a very short period of time, kind of what she's facing and what she's going up against. And so she goes into this battle, and once she's there, a lot of things happen. Now, I won't divulge if she survives or not, but the battle that she rolls into, what happens in that battle and what happens during that whole process is very, very interesting. And you go from this battle heavy war combat, the cycle of violence, to some really heavy horror, and it almost turns into like a really dark fantasy. It kind of almost reminded me of something like Eaters of the Dead, or the movie The 13th Warrior, which is the same thing, just adapted. But it kind of gave me that kind of feeling, like there's something else at play here. It's not just so straightforward. But it does tackle some different ideas, and by the end of this book, your head will hurt, but in a good way, because it presents a lot of different ideas in a pretty short period of time. But doesn't feel overwhelming with the ideas that are presented. It's just overwhelming with the scope, and you start to wonder. You want to go back and reread and see what you missed, because you feel like there's so much to this little book that will really keep you thinking long after you finished it. So it's a really short book. Like I said, you don't have to read Gunmetal Gods before, but I think it will help give context, but it's not required. So I would recommend it, but you don't have to. And you should read Gunmetal Gods anyway, because it's one of my favorites of the year. But if you want to get a feel for it, if you're new to fantasy, if you just want to give it a try to see what you think of it, it's a really short book that packs a big punch. We did have a spoiler-filled discussion with our group and Zamil. So if you're curious, if you want to learn more about what went into this book, want to hear his ideas and his thoughts, kind of what went into it, I'll leave the link up in the cards. And novellas are tough to say too much about because it's a small book, has a lot of ideas that are presented, has a lot of themes in this one, but it's hard to say too much about it without spoiling the story for you. So I hope hearing my thoughts can help you decide whether you want to give it a shot or not. If you do give it a try, let me know down below what you thought of it. Until next time, I want to thank you for watching, and I will talk to you soon.